Hello, and welcome back to the Ask the Color Expert podcast. Today's solo episode is the topic of formula sharing. To share or not to share? That is the question. When it comes to protecting your secret formulas for your clients, are you comfortable sharing them with a new stylist that the client is leaving you to go to? Whether or not they're leaving you to move to another state or they just feel like they need a change. How do you feel about it when a client reaches out and asks you to share that recipe? So, in the beginning of my career, I had my recipes under lock and key. I didn't even want to share them with my coworkers. I was very competitive. I was trying to build my business. I didn't want, all the education that I was taking to grow my knowledge in color. I didn't want to just give away to the person next to me to be able to see that client if I was on vacation or out sick. And when I look back on that time, it's just so silly. There's really no reason to be so protective of that information. And there's definitely two sides to the fence in our industry on that. There's the side that says, why should I make it easy on the next person when I'm losing a client? But to that, I say, why are you losing the client in the first place? You have to take some accountability for, yes, clients move away to other states. That happens. I've never had a problem sharing my recipe and formula with a colorist in another state. I've also gone as far as to get on the phone and speak to the colorist from another state to make sure that they understand the formula, to make sure they understand the lingo when I write it down quickly for the client when they're in my chair. And for me, it was about protecting my client, about making sure, especially it's ironic that I live in Florida now because some of the biggest offenders of, undoing all the work that I did on my client's hair were the Florida snowbird hairstylists. I've never seen anything like it. Sorry to throw shade on Florida. It is now my home state, but the condition and color and all the things that the client would come back to me after a long winter and spend the rest of the year with me in Pennsylvania. It took me a while to get them back on track, and the client had to spend extra money with me, which I don't mind, but I'd rather my client not have to spend money as a corrective service. If the client in Florida or California or any other state just followed what I did, we all would have been happier. There's this thing about sharing formulas where there's an underlying suspicion on the person receiving the formula. I mean, how many times have you gotten a scribbled, stained index card handed to you by a client? I know I have clients who, end up in my chair because their stylist retired or they're out on maternity or they moved and they pull it out and they're embarrassed to hand it to me. And I look at it and it's usually undecipherable. It's like chicken scratch with, different, like I was always an ounces recipe person and it was in grams, a lot of abbreviation. What happens in hair color, if you have colored hair long enough and you've worked with different lines, that a T in Redken is titanium. A T in All Nutrient is tobacco, I think it's called. So it's a warmer shade. So you have to be careful. You look at these recipes and sometimes they don't make sense, but I have found the hard way that B is not always blue. So in the lines that I use, blue is B in a formula. I've talked to some of my students in my Hair Color Secrets Insider Inner Circle, which, if you're not aware, that is an amazing place to be. You have me, full access to me as your mentor. I have, over 300 members that I meet with once a month, and we have live coaching calls, but they have access to me all the time, not just once a month. And I'll be talking to a member and I'll be walking them through a corrective process, and they'll mention that they're using 8B. And I'm like, oh, why are you using B? I thought you were looking for a warm result. And they're like, I am. And I'm like, well, why are you using blue? And they're like, I'm not, I'm using B. They were using a line that B was brown. It was a balanced brown. So shame on me for not, digging deeper. I do now. Ever since then, I ask, what is the brand? What is the exact type of color in that brand? You have liquid acidic demi, you have cream alkaline demi, you have, permanent liquid, you have permanent gel, you have permanent cream color. There's European color, there's American color, there's so many different colors. So being as specific as possible, I have seen hairstylists purposely be very cryptic in their sharing of the formula because deep down they're secretly pissed and they don't want to share the formula, but they don't want to act petty to the client. So they give the client the recipe, knowing that the next person can't possibly decipher how they have it written, and basically purposely setting that other stylist up to fail, which I think is, a sad place to be. And I think that comes from a place of ego. Sorry if that stings a little bit, but if you're that protective of your clients and your recipes, you don't have enough clients, because if you are successful and busy and have a wait list all the time, you don't have time to get wrapped up in the ego of, I'm not giving her my recipe. That's my knowledge. I worked hard to make that recipe and I had to get extra education to be able to figure that out. And it's magic. And I only want the magic to be in me. I just think that's ego. I'm sorry. I've been doing this almost 40 years and I look at things so differently than I did when I was in my 20s, 30s, and even up until my 50s. I often jokingly refer to the 50s as the FU 50s. It's the FU decade. I don't want to say the full curse because I offend some people when I'm my total self. But I call it the FU 50s because you finally realize what is important. You finally know how to prioritize what matters, what you can and should be getting upset about. Sharing a formula, just let it go. Share it, don't share it, but just let it go. If the client's leaving you, let it be a lesson. Why do you think she left? Another topic that I wanted to get into on this vein of the sharing formulas is, can you handle the truth? Can you handle the feedback of the true reason why the client left you? I did a coffee chat for my members about ghosting. Would you prefer your client just goes away and you wonder, like a bad breakup, not bad breakup, like a new dating breakup? Like, why didn't he ever call me? You just are left lingering, wondering why. It's not a good feeling, but some people would rather know the truth, even if it stings a little bit. So I want to share a story. One of my, really long time clients, very wealthy client, very particular, could be very difficult. Hopefully she doesn't listen to my podcast. She probably doesn't, but I'm going to share. I won't say her name, but very, very wealthy, very particular. And she is a brunette who does not want any warmth in her hair. Raise your hand. I'm not going to be able to see you. It's a podcast, but I want you to think about how many times you've heard that in your day, in your month, in your, year or years. In the time that you've been doing hair, how many times has a brunette said, I just want it to look like my natural brown. I don't want any red. I don't want any orange. I don't want it to fade funky. I just want my brown hair with no gray. So this guest had maybe 20% gray when I started seeing her. And the reason that she was so loyal for over 20 years, when she married a very, very wealthy billionaire and she could have gone anywhere, I was, flattered that she chose me, but it wasn't about me or my personality. It was about my technique. So I knew that she spends a lot of time on boats. She goes to Bali. She goes to Fiji. She goes, she's always in the sun. She's always getting spoiled on some kind of big private sailboat, private island kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, brunette, sun, brass. So I came up with a whole plan that's completely unorthodox. It's not the norm in the industry to use a product this way, but it works. And I do it that way. And I also teach it in my membership. So I moved to Florida 6 years ago. So she was still living in Pennsylvania and she spends half of her year in California. So she now needs a colorist in Pennsylvania and a colorist in California. So over the last 6 years, I hear from her at least every 6 months. And every 6 months, she calls me and says, I'm going to somebody new. They're not getting it right. They're not listening. I gave them your recipe. They're not doing what you told them to do. What am I supposed to do? I'm like, I can't help you with that. I can only tell you what I did. I can't force your stylist into doing it. I understand why they're questioning it. And they probably think that I'm setting them up and that I'm BSing what your formula is, because to 90% of stylists out there, my formula doesn't make sense. The other 10% of stylists are in my inner circle and they understand the why behind this client's recipe and they understand why and how I make it work. So, Sunday of this week, I get a text from said client, help, exclamation point. I need your help. Can you talk? Sure. She calls me. We start to talk. I did it again. I tried a new stylist. I told them what you use on my hair. They did not believe me. They did not listen. They used, color on me that my scalp is itching like crazy. And every time I scratch my scalp, I look at my fingernails and they're black. So I'm like, okay, wow. All right. So what do you need from me? She's like, can you please talk to my existing colorist and tell her what you do so that she can do a better job on me and I can get my color back on track. I said, I'm happy to talk to your stylist. So I said, are you going to be able to get her on a Sunday? Because she's calling me on a Sunday. So she's like, yeah. Hold on. So she patches me in on a, three-way call, and her stylist gets on and I say, hi, nice to meet you, blah, 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 small talk. And I said, can I ask what you're using on her hair right now? And she told me that she used Color Gel's 10-minute color and processes for 35 minutes. So I took a deep breath. I was like, Elaine, she's not your student. She's not your sister. She's not your friend. She's a stranger on the phone. Be kind in your delivery. Don't come off bitchy, because I know I can be a little blunt, for lack of a better word. That's a nice way to say bitchy. Very blunt, very straightforward. And I said, okay, I know that the client has had some itching and she's getting some color under her fingernails. So I'm suspecting that it's because you're using a 10-minute color for 35 minutes. And maybe you didn't use a product after the color to bring the pH back down. Maybe it wasn't rinsed all the way. There's a million different things it could be, but you just want to be aware that Redken 10-minute color was not designed to be used for 35 minutes. Wow. Talk about shoot the messenger. This girl did not like me telling her that. So she said, this is what I do. I do it to all my clients. I've done it this way for over 20 years. Everyone loves me. All my clients are happy except for this one client. And I don't know what to tell you. I don't know why it doesn't work for her. And I said, okay, I hear you. I did not say this, but I was thinking Redken Color Gels is maybe 3 years old, 3 years it's only been out. The 10-minute. So I'm like, definitely not using it for 20 years. It didn't exist 20 years ago. But I was like, okay, she's already pissed. I'm not going to school her on when the birth of 10-minute color was. And the fact that I even know that tells me I need to get a life and talk about and learn about things other than hair color. But I do know that because I've been using it. So I was like, yeah, it's really not meant to be processed for 35 minutes. It gets darker as it sits. This client doesn't like her hair really dark, and she's not really looking to shift or lift or do anything. So you really don't need to go in guns a-blazing with color like this. Can I make a suggestion for what I used to do to her hair? So I tell her what I used to do, and she says, I did that. It didn't work. And I said, I know. And I get that a lot. I get that a lot from my students when they first try to do this method that I share with them. And when I do some digging and I ask them questions, I find out why it didn't work. So, do I have your permission to take you down that road and ask you about that? Sure. Really, like, not really, but okay. I was like, okay, what was your application? What do you mean? What was your application? How did you put it onto the hair? I applied it with a ball and brush. I said, okay, that's part of the issue. The method that I teach, in order to get really good gray coverage on hair that's maybe more than, 40, 35% gray, I highly recommend using an applicator bottle with a um, thicker developer, because it really helps with saturation. And before I could even get the next step out, which is tapping with a brush, she said, oh, come on. Are you seriously telling me that because I didn't use an old lady hair color bottle, that's why her grade in color? You know what? I'm done here. I'm so done. And I'm sorry, blank client name, but this is the end of the road here. I'm not doing your hair anymore. This is no longer working for me. You're never happy. And I don't need somebody telling me how to apply color. I've been doing this over 20 years. I have a full client list and they all love me. Click, and hung up. I was like, wow. Meanwhile, I am in Lowe's looking for spigots for my house. I've been out of my home since September. It has been super stressful. I'm stressed out in the store because I'm trying to find satin chrome, and nothing is satin chrome. It is satin nickel and not chrome. So now the faucet doesn't match the handle, doesn't match the whatever. And I'm like, these are all first world problems, but I have a migraine, and now I'm arguing with a colorist I've never met in the other coast of Florida because I told her to use an applicator bottle. So why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing it because in order to be successful, we can't know everything. We can't have an answer for everything. And if you're struggling with a particular client and the client's former stylist has the answer and is talking to you on a day that she doesn't work, on a phone call in a home improvement store on her own time, talk about crossing boundaries, I was happy to help if she was open to listening. Whether she did what I told her or not, she did not have to take it out on me and act like I was being condescending and mean and nasty. I was being someone who loves hair color, who loves teaching, who loves being a mentor, and loves helping people have billionaire clients that are paying in the you know what get a better result. I received nothing in this entire situation. I wasn't charging this client a fee for an over the phone consultation. I was doing her a favor as someone who did her hair for 20 years, and I know how difficult she can be. I didn't recommend this client to anyone that I know because they would never talk to me again because she's tough. So the fact that this girl was already doing her hair and already knows that she's tough, I looked at it as I'm holding out an olive branch. I'm holding out your rescue. I'm sending you the life preserver and you're choosing to just drown instead. So she hung up and said to the client, I can't do your hair anymore. This is no longer working. She had a hissy fit. So then I spent the next 20 minutes with the client. She was saying to me, what am I going to do? How are you going to help me? Like it was my problem. How are you going to help me find someone to do my hair? I'm like, I've been gone for 6 years. You've been through, I didn't say this, of course, but she's been through probably 10 different people that I recommended that I knew would be able to help her. And they're all mad at me for referring her because she's so tough. So be open to suggestion, be open to another way to do something. Don't just shut down and let your ego prevent you from learning something new. If she had stayed on the phone and listened to me, her entire book could have completely shifted. She's in the East Coast of Florida. That heat and sun is just pounding on those clients' hair, the brunettes and blondes, between the hard water and the sun and the salt water and the chlorine and all the things that we do in Florida. I could have changed her entire career. I've been doing hair 40 years. And she wanted to school me on the fact that she's been doing it 20 years. It doesn't matter how many years you've been doing it. There's always another way. And there's no right and wrong. She's not wrong. I mean, she chose to use a 10-minute color for 35 minutes. It's against manufacturer's instructions. It's against my, story when it comes to color. I would never do that. The only time I use a 10-minute color is when I have 10 minutes to color the hair. That's it. It's not a beautiful color. Like I don't promote replacing your entire color line with a 10-minute color because it's a very flat, very intentional. Like I just want this gray covered. I'm in a rush. I just want straight up coverage. It's not a nuance. There's not a lot of shade selection in a 10-minute color. It's usually like ends or straight up cool. So that would not have been my first choice. But if you're going to use a 10-minute color, process it for 10 minutes, wash the hair really well, use a product after every color service that brings the pH back down and closes that cuticle down. A lot of people think that hair color, like demi color, that it closes the cuticle and makes it shiny. It does not close the cuticle. If you test a pH strip in a Redken Shades EQ color formula, it is not in an acidic form when it's mixed with developer and put on the hair. So it's not closing anything down. There are products that do bring back down the pH and seal everything in. No client should scratch her scalp and have black fingernails ever, 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 ever. That's never acceptable. So if you heard something on this podcast that intrigues you, maybe you want to know more about the formula and the method that I use on that client. It's something I use every day. I do more of that than anything else in the salon. In my salon, I no longer work in my salon, but that's one of the methods that we swear by, especially for first time color and for brunettes that don't want brassiness and aren't really looking for any big change. They just want their gray covered. So I want to share that with you. You can join the Inner Circle. Enrollment is open right now. It's not always open. It'll be open through the end of this month. What is today? March 18th. Until the end of the month, you can join the Inner Circle for only $97 a month, and it includes an entire library of over 100 lessons, as well as live coaching with me once a month, and the ability to come to our in-person event, which will be in the suburbs of Philadelphia, September 22nd and 23rd. You do not want to miss this event. It is, something we look forward to every year. We usually do 2 events, one in April, one in November. This year we're doing September in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So I hope that you'll consider joining the Inner Circle. More information, check out my website, www.expertcolorsolutions.com. And I hope to see you in the Inner Circle soon. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Ask the Color Expert podcast. I'll see you on the next one.